And the third field of storytelling in tourism is storytelling as means of interpretation. And this is an example of Arcticum Science Museum in Rovaniemi, where I was this weekend. And where they're using, so interpretation is used in museums, zoos, heritage sites, conservation parks. Is anywhere when you want to interpret natural or cultural heritage to the tourists. So this is an example when they're using a story of a typical field, and they've been following him in 1990s, and then 10 years later, and 10 years later. And you can, you know, he's a character in terms that you can have an emotional response towards following his life. And then you're following what's happening. So where he got employed, who he got married with, he got children, so what he's doing now. Okay? So interpretation, you use stories for people to learn more. And you also use them just to entertain them at the same time. So there are many examples where tour guides or tourist guides actually use these small sections of stories just to make it more interesting. And for example, this is a small story from one of the oldest houses in Brežice, where my faculty is located. And the story goes, it's about Karl and a shattered tooth of Evgenia Delcote. The house of family Delcote is one of the oldest houses in Brežice. In 1771, Leonard Delcote moved from Italy and opened a shop that bore his name throughout the centuries. For a very long time, Delcotes were the longest and the richest family in Brežice. A family story speaks of 11-year-old Karl, who, while playing with the neighbor's daughter Evgenia, broke her tooth. While both families reacted in protest, he rushed to settle the matter by promising he would marry her. They married in 1877. So, when tourists go around the streets, they just learn this small story about how a young boy broke a tooth to a neighbor's daughter and decided, okay, I will marry her. Even though she does not have a tooth, don't worry, she'll get a husband, it will be me. So, and the most important part is he kept his promise. So what also you get for that interpretation is that keeping a promise is a very high value in Slovenia. So implicitly the tourists learn also about that. This is another example of using a small story from the Arcticum Museum here in Rovaniemi. It's titled The Quarrel About the Small Splash of Color. So I really like the title, since it's okay, interesting, what will it be about? And you know, it will be about nipples. This is the small splash of color. So the authors of this exhibition of how Finland has been trying to promote, how Finland tourism destination has been promoting Finland. The authors were saying, we tried to figure out who the author of this poster was. And we had a problem. We did not know who Abe is. So they put out and turned to the internet and please help us find Abe. So they published it. And really, after a while, 1 year later, they received an email from Sweden saying, Abe, Albert Andersson, is my father. So the daughter of this author actually told them, okay, yeah, I know who made this. It was my father. And they were overjoyed, and their joy only grew when Albert's daughter told them the following story. And this is again an example of a very small story, but really interesting one. Father told me that he hung a fish from his studio's roof so that he could observe how the light fell and created the right kind of shimmer to the mermaid scale. And if you're observing the mermaid, really, you can see it's special here. You know, usually when people are coloring fish, they don't think about this part of the light. So this is some element that you point out to the tourists. And if you follow the story further, and best of all, when the work was finished, the administration thought that the color of the mermaid's nipples was too strong and too provocative. As a result, he was ordered to fade the color, which he did and showed the changes to the administration. But because he knew what he wanted the final piece to look like, he changed the color back to the original right before it was printed. And there the splash of color remains. So what's this story about? It's actually about an author who's a hero in tackling with the administration. He did not give in to censorship. So he said, okay, yeah, I will correct it, but I know how my mermaid should look like. So just before it went to print, he changed it back again. An extremely interesting story. If you're talking about tour guides and interpretation, the element of how we define a tour guide is that they should interpret in an inspiring and entertaining manner. So if we compare a tour guide to a teacher, for example, a teacher has different sets of, let's say, sanctions. We can tell the students, okay, if you're not listening, if you're not doing your homework, if you're not doing this and that, you can get a bad grade. Imagine you being a tourist guide. Can you say to one of your tourists, hey, you back there, if you're not listening to me, I will grade you badly? Of course not. So to be inspiring, to be entertaining is a really important element of being a tourist guide. And how do you do it? You do it through telling stories. So most commonly, tour guides have to tell about openly available information, locations, travel advice, significant dates, and historical events. And all of that can be done via stories. And at the end, what I will talk about is another research, when they also compared the effect of storytelling, but this time in interpretation. So Jacobs et al. In 2014, they were interested in whales and how to convince tourists to start caring about whales, to have this, to do something later on, not just to observe the whales, but really have this change in your environmental perspective. So what they've done is, they've compared three types of stories. They would turn them, not stories, interpretations. They would turn them knowledge condition, responsibility condition, and emotion condition. And how all of those types actually influence conservation intentions of tourists. So the knowledge condition interpretation only included knowledge, only included facts, and included information like, we are now on our way to find some whales and dolphins. We have about 250 resident pilot whales here. Pilot whales belong to the same family as dolphins, blah, 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 blah. So information about what whales are. The second type of interpretation was responsibility condition. So when they took out tourists to see the whales, they would tell them information about, like, only recently an entire species has gone extinct because of us humans, and in the next 40 years we will lose 37% more of species on our planet. And this is the fault of us humans, unless we as an individual act now. So the whole point of this interpretation was to tell the tourists that us humans are responsible for the situation in which the whales are right now. And the third interpretation was emotion condition. They call it like that, but actually it's storytelling. What they were using, they transformed the whales into people, in terms of they were anthropomorphizing them. They gave them names, and they were telling about how affectionate whales are when they're with their family. And they took a story of a trumpa, a whale. They tell them the name of the whale and how they were really worried about the whale because the whale disappeared. And after a while she came back and they were relieved because it was so dangerous for the whales. So which one do you think worked the best? I don't think you need to be the genius here, but yeah, the emotional condition, the storytelling condition actually had the best results. It resulted into highest levels of conservation intentions with the tourists. If we're staying with interpretation, we're talking here about Muscardo Gianna, who created a model of interpretation in tourism. I will just present this here. And what she's saying is that we usually follow two different paths of interpretation, of information processing. So the first one is mindless. So have you ever driven a car and when you got there, when you were thinking, how the heck did I get here? You wouldn't even remember how you were driving. You almost felt like you were doing it on autopilot. Or for example, if you're listening to a lecture for a long while, I hope this is not happening to you right now, it's been a very long lecture, but after a while you get mindless. Your mind wanders off, you're not paying attention anymore. And the other possibility is you're mindful. When you're paying attention, you're really thinking about what's happening, what's the information, you really want to process it. So why is that? Why do we have these two forms of thinking? It's because our brain is smart. because our brain is not actually an almighty machine. So it needs to look out for cues when it says, okay, right now I need to pay attention, and right now I can relax. And just imagine that you would have to pay attention to everything in your world. It's impossible, you would get crazy. So that's why we have these two routes of information processing. But there are reasons where there are factors that influence where we are in the one or the other one. And the best way for people to get bored and mindless is to use repetitive or unsensory media. Like, for example, something like this. It's just text. It can be even more boring, it would be text like this. So, but if you're using different multimedia, different ways of information, so the brain starts to pay attention. Very traditional exhibits, so when you're entering a museum and everything looks like you have already seen, very similar to what's everywhere else. Okay, your mind tells you, boring, boring, seen that, already know all that, let's just find something new to get interested. Another reason is when you have no control in interaction. Like, for example, the video lecture right now, if you're a student on the other side, you have no control over me, except that you can push a stop button, which I guess you can't even, because you probably have to sit and listen to me in any case. But if people have the control over interaction, that means they're paying attention more. Because, for example, imagine you're a tourist guide and you would ask your tourists of, where should we go? On the left or on the right? On the right you can hear this and this and this, and on the left we can see this and this and this. Where should we go first? So when people have the opportunity to actually influence the set of events, their mind tells them, okay, now I really have to pay attention, because there will be consequences for it. Another is to be mindless, is to have static exhibits. Nothing's jumping, nothing's moving. Everything is really static. That means, for example, if I would be, even when you're talking, if you have a static presenter, that would mean I would be talking like this all the time. And imagine even my voice going really flat all the time, with no actually differences whatsoever when I'm talking. After 2 minutes of that, you will probably start falling asleep. That's why when we're talking, we need to wave our hands and be more static. Orientation, again, is very important. So when people see something that's really, you cannot orient in it, either in a structure of a text or in a structure of an exhibit, you just decide, too difficult, it's too mixed up. I'm not even going to try to find a pattern in that. And finally, no guides present. So if you have a person there who's knowledgeable, who's good at their work, it actually influences very, very, very much the tourist's experience. So you can ask the person starts to talk to you about, okay, well, now we see this, now we see this. Oh, did you pay attention to the fish there? And the story about the mermaid. And to be mindful is actually exactly the opposite to what we already talked about here. So to get tourists interested, you would need to have varied multisensory media, you would need to have novelty, conflict, and surprise. And that is where the storyline comes in. So novelty, conflict, surprise is actually elements of the stories, if you remember. So this is how people start to pay attention to you. This is how you get them interested in this. This is how you actually get the high interest in content, low levels of fatigue, and educational motive, versus when you're mindless, low interest in content, I'm not really interested, high levels of fatigue, I'm really bored. Or entertainment, social motive, which basically means I'm quite, let's say, embarrassed to admit this, but I think it's an interesting story. When I was in high school, they took us to see a scientific center about physics. And we had a presenter there who had only 3 people in the audience really interested in what he was saying. So those of them were listening to him in awe and asking questions. And what did everyone else do? We found chairs with wheels. And we started to roll around with chairs with wheels. And nobody told us not to do that. So right now I would be really embarrassed, and I would be embarrassed of myself and my students when we would go somewhere and they was just running around on chairs. But for us at that point was, oh, we're bored, let's find something more interesting to do. And what we found is we got the entertainment and social motive. We were definitely not in the educational motive where we should have been. So you as a tourist guide or you as a teacher, whoever, you really want people to learn from what you're saying. And how do you do that? At the same time, by using stories, conflict, surprise. So how do you do that? By making the information more entertaining at the same time. So what's the result? Here you get more learning, high satisfaction and greater understanding. And here you get the opposite. So people pay attention, just to sum up, when they believe they can influence the turn of the events, when they believe that the information provided is relevant to them, and when there's a set of new and different information. And storytelling uses novelty, conflict and surprise, and that creates mindful visitors. And then at the end we get more learning, higher satisfaction and greater understanding. And what would the whole point of today's lecture be? Think about stories in your life and how you can really use them both in your personal life and in your tourism career. And good luck with that in the future.